Hello and welcome to Fit After 40. Tony, would you like to introduce our guest today?
Yeah, I'm pretty excited today because we have Lauren Beihoffer, who is also goes by Lauren Runswild to some people. She's a coach, she's an ultra runner, a chemist, and she was also on the past season of Naked and Afraid. So we'd like to talk to you a little bit about that at the end of the show. But most importantly, we have you here because you're a coach, and I believe you kind of focus primarily on folks that are over 40 years old, which I think is appropriate because this show is Fit After 40. So I thought maybe we kind of kick it off with your coaching and talk a little bit about some of the reasons why you think someone should hire a coach.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, guys, for having me. I always love to talk about running to probably the point where people get annoyed. So I'm glad when I get invited to just talk all I want. When should someone get a coach? That's a really common question. And the answer I give people is it just depends. It's kind of everything when someone asks a question that has to do with coaching, is the answer is it depends. And so coaching has a lot of benefits. One of the reasons probably a lot of people midlife especially come for coaching is because it just reduces their mental load. They don't have to think about their training. They don't have to be the one trying to plan it and figure out if they're doing it right. And so they're kind of relieved of that burden with the heavy thinking, and they just work with a coach to get a plan that fits their lifestyle, fits their goals, and it just becomes an opportunity for them to do what they want and what they enjoy without that extra burden of always planning their workouts and knowing if it's too much or too little. And so that's kind of one of the big things I think in midlife for a lot of athletes who come to me. Some people come for coaching after a string of injuries or DNFs. And they're like, what am I doing wrong? Or, is there something I can do better or change? Is there a different approach? So a lot of times, people who are already in the world of running or endurance sports will come because things just aren't working for them. And then, I would say there's also a lot of people who come because things change in midlife. And so maybe they were an athlete, in their 20s, 30s, and then all of a sudden they hit their 40s, 45, 50, and it's like the wheels fall off and the things they used to do no longer work well for them. And so they're like, how do I keep doing the things I love, but in a way where I don't feel trashed all the time? What's happening to my body? Why are things changing? So there's a multitude of reasons. There's many more than that. Some people don't know how to incorporate nutrition side of things or the strength training component, and so they need guidance putting it all together. And so and some people are just starting out, brand new to whether it's running or whatever sport it is, and they just don't really know where to start. And so sometimes it's good to have a coach to just kind of not only set up workouts, but just to offer the experience, that they have learned over the years. And it avoids, right, the pitfalls of you kind of making those same mistakes yourself. So lots of, reasons I would say why I see people come to me for coaching.
Have you ever used a coach in your own life, and how did you find it beneficial? And did that kind of inspire you to move into doing this as a job, I guess?
Yeah, I actually started coaching myself years ago before. Well, I was a runner, but I wasn't probably in as deep as I am now into ultra running. But way back, I was a personal trainer, so I love strength training and nutrition, and so I had done that for a while, kind of off and on as a part-time thing. And it really wasn't until more recently that I had a coach myself. So I've had coaches in nutrition, mainly for me, because that was the one component that I struggled with for a variety of reasons. And so it was really beneficial for myself. I was already a coach at that time, but it made me understand the value even more because it was an area that I was struggling in. I was well versed in, but I could not figure out my own issues. I needed like that outside look, right? Someone looking in and trying to problem solve beyond the things I had done. And so yeah, it was completely helpful. And there were things that figured out that I probably wouldn't have figured out on my own. I needed somebody else's expertise somebody else's experiences to kind of give me that insight, like, oh yeah, this is what I should be doing. That's really helpful. And so, yeah, that really kind of hit home the value of just bringing in a third party to, somebody who wants the best for you and maybe has more experience than you in that particular field. So for myself, I've had a couple of coaches for short periods of time, and it just absolutely has reiterated how important it can be.
And I think something that's really interesting about that too, to think about is, I haven't had a coach really since I was in high school sports, but that's a really important point too, as far as it, like, it's so motivating too, to some degree. You talked about that a little earlier. If you've got somebody out there and they've got the workout for you, you do the workout, and it makes it nice and easy. You don't have to think about it too much. And on top of that, it gives you that little bump, like you got somebody that's holding you accountable. So
Accountability.
if I don't go out and do this, I got to do this, and I remember when I was a high school athlete, a lot of days you didn't want to do that workout, but you had to, because the coach was there telling you had to. And I think that's a great thing.
Yeah.
We talked about how you cater specifically to people in the 40 plus crowd. So dealing with those folks, what do you do specifically to cater to people, and design plans that work for people that are 40 years old or greater, to achieve things like an ultra or whatever distance they want to run?
Yeah, here's the thing about aging. People kind of get upset sometimes when you talk about aging because they just want to believe that nothing really changes. But the fact is, our biology and our physiology says otherwise. We are changing as we get older. It's not necessarily a negative thing, it's just a fact of life. And so what's really important to understand is that everything is magnified with age. When you're talking about how an endurance sport affects your body, affects your bones, affects your muscles, everything is magnified. If we look at like a 20-year-old compared to a 45-year-old, there are huge differences in how the two will process carbohydrates, the stress to their bones, the time for recovery. There's just scientific fact that things change as we age. And so our goal is to figure out how to maximize what we're doing to work with our changing biology. And so we can pretend it's not a thing and just say, I'm going to train the same way as I was when I was in my 20s, which we all know is probably not going to end well. If we think back to when you were 18, 19 and 20 to how you are now, everything's different. And so some of the big things, I'll kind of divide this into females and males. And the only reason is in our 40s, even sometimes late 30s, for females, it's a huge shift in hormones. Even if they're not technically in perimenopause or approaching menopause, we now know there are huge shifts underneath the surface in hormones, and that affects everything. And so men, also their bodies are changing, but they don't have as wide swings in hormones changing over time. Yes, there is reduction in testosterone in some people, but it is a much slower, gentler process. So it's really common for women in their 40s to kind of hit a place where they're like, dang, things are changing. I feel different. I can't perform like I used to. I'm gaining weight. What is happening? And so it becomes this thing that there's no education on it. You think about menopause and changing hormones, there's just not a lot of people talk about it. Nowadays there are. Used to, when I was growing up and much younger, you never talked about it. It was very taboo. Research is still lacking. And so, you just had women who are trying to run an ultra or do some endurance sport. They hit their 40s and things start going wrong. And they're like, why? I'm doing everything I used to do and nothing's working. So some of the big things for this age group are bone health. And again, picking on women over men, it's a hormone issue. When you get fluctuations in estrogen and estrogen starts to decline, that affects your bone growth, okay? And so your bone integrity. And we know that women are at higher risk of osteoporosis as they age. Men are not exempt from that, but it's usually a slower decline. And so it just becomes really important for females, especially during this time where they're getting changes in hormones. You do have to be more aware of, hey, you're at higher risk of a bone stress injury that could take you out of running. Men are not exempt from that either, although their odds are a little bit better. But even men in their 40s will see a decrease in power, a decrease in strength, a decrease in speed. And so the goal becomes for all of these populations, no matter what issues that they're having, is how do we combat that? Okay. And to combat those changes, we have to do things differently than we did when we were in our 20s. The research is coming out recently that, you know, for your average, let's say 20-year-old versus 40-year-old, the 40-year-old needs about twice as much protein to rebuild their muscle than a 20-year-old does. Same thing with carbohydrates. Our insulin sensitivity begins to change as we age. We've always known this. And again, that affects you, whether it's gaining weight or not processing carbohydrates effectively while you're running. There's lots of issues that pop up. You know, the loss of power is a big one. That is something that decreases more than your bone integrity, more than your muscle loss that naturally occurs as you age. Your loss of power is pretty extreme. And so if you're not doing something to combat that loss of power, you are going to slow down. You are going to feel more tired. You are going to be at higher risk for certain injuries. And so there's just a lot of things that you have to start thinking about to combat these issues that come about from aging.
You know, something I always think about too, though, is you talked about the issues that arise, but you said it's not all bad, and maybe dig into that a little bit, because it's not all bad. When I think about 20-year-old me, yeah, I was physically probably had like the ability to do a lot of these things at a greater degree, but I was mentally, I would never run 100 miles when I was 20 years old. No way that was ever going to happen. And let me know if you think this is true with some of your clients and so on, that there is a certain amount of like grit. And then the fact that you do have an aging body, are you not just, you know, you can handle pain a little bit better because pain's a little bit more part of your everyday life than it is when you're 20 and you know, you go out and pound beers all night and you wake up the next morning feeling like, you know, like great. So
Right.
Yeah, I like to think by the time you've hit 40, you've seen some things, right? You've been through some things. And so it is, you know, it is a phenomenon. If we look across the board, like let's say ultra running and just endurance sports in general, it tends to be older people, okay? People who, have some drive that pushes them to push their body, you know, right? 20-year-olds, we were probably all in great shape and could have really pulled off some magnificent physical feats. But you don't see a lot of 20-year-olds out there running 100 miles and suffering for 24 hours. So why is that? And so there's a lot of, you know, theories as to what that is. But yeah, I think, you know, there's those quotes about midlife is where you kind of realize who you are, what's important, what you value. And I think that has a lot to do with it as well. And also you just realize like, wow, I got to take care of this body because, you know, I was when I was 20, I could drink whatever I wanted, eat whatever I wanted, sleep for 2 hours a night and be just fine. I cannot do that in my 40s. You know, I'm miserable. And so it gives you a new perspective. And then you have all this life experience. You know, if you look at ultra running in the world of endurance sports, you'll see a lot of people have overcome addictions or trauma, and they cope physically by endurance sports. So it's a great strategy to help give them meaning in their life, to give them an outlet to process emotions and challenges that they've dealt with, and to celebrate their life, you know, of overcoming things. And so I think we see that a lot. You know, there's some big people on social media who talk about overcoming addictions or overcoming PTSD and turning to endurance sports to kind of challenge themselves in a new way with all of this history they have, right? They've got this history of overcoming things and this history of going through hard things. And so you kind of get to a place where you're like, well, what am I capable of? And how far can I push myself? And, you know, how can I keep my body doing these amazing things for as long as I want? So yeah, I think it's just a whole shift in perspective from life experience for sure.
And kind of just carrying on that same flow there, basically, like what brought you into endurance sports? Because, you run, I know, but now recently, I think you're branching into some other stuff, and you just some adventure racing and those sorts of things. And some could argue Naked and Afraid is an endurance sport of its own in its own right. An extreme endurance sport at that. So what brought you to endurance sports personally?
So funny enough, I kind of entered it in what I call the cliche way. I was in my 30s. I'd already had 2 kids. And one day I realized, like, yeah, I've put on a lot of weight. But man, I'm just not active. Like, I'm not really even exercising or doing anything. I just kind of got caught up in life. I think that's kind of common for people. They get out of college or they get, high school, college age. They get busy with a career and kind of getting their life moving forward. And you do kind of lose sight of that, the physical activity. And so I was, 2 kids, working, doing all these things. And then I just kind of looked in the mirror one day and was like, wow, Lauren, you used to be so fit and, what can we do about this? So I just kind of came up with this random goal one day. I saw something on social media about like running a 5K. And I was like, you know what? I've never really liked running, but that seems like a good goal. Like it gets me out of the house. I get some me time. I get some fresh air and I get some exercise. I've always loved the outdoors. I've always been a hiker, backpacker. I've always enjoyed being outside. So it was kind of like this perfect thing. Like, okay, I'm going to train and I'm going to run a 5K. And so that's what I did. And I ran it and it was hard. And I was like, that wasn't so bad. Like I kind of enjoyed training for that and getting out and kind of doing something for me. And then, it kind of struck me after running a couple of short races. I was like, okay, I like this kind of exercise. It's, gives me some freedom. I feel good. I've lost a little weight. I feel healthier. And then I realized, hey, since I love the outdoors so much and I love hiking, why don't I try running on trails? So I signed up for a little local trail race they used to do at Montgomery Bell, put on by the state park years ago. It was like a little 8-mile trail race. So I was like, yeah, what the heck? I'm just going to go do that. And so I did. And it was way harder than I thought it would be. I mean, I didn't really train, I was just kind of like, let's just see. I did it and I got done with it. And I was like, wow, that was super, super fun. Like, maybe this is like something I want to keep doing. So I did. I just kind of kept running on trails. And then one day, people are talking about running marathons. And I was like, oh, that's crazy. I'd never do that. And then the next thing I know, I'm running a marathon. And then it's like a gateway drug. Here I am doing a 50K. And I'm like, well, if I can do a 50K, I'm sure I could do a 50 miler. I mean, you do a 50 miler and you're like, well, what the heck? Let's just do a 100 miler. And so it kind of snowballs, into this. You just love being out there so much that you just kind of keep pushing and pushing. And it's almost amazing to look back. Because I'm like, if you had set down 30-year-old Lauren and said, one day you're going to be running 100 milers, I would have laughed so hard at you. I mean, I couldn't even run a mile, much less some 100 miler in the mountains. And so it's almost like this fun, personal challenge of like, wow, not only do I love this, but look what I can do. I can't believe this. And that's really how it happened.
It's kind of interesting too. Like, I think a lot of us have that same kind of rise from the 5K up to, and the next thing you know, you're doing something, but also like along the way, you hear about these things existing, like the ultra distances, and you just think, man, that's just insane. Like people can't do that. But then you just kind of build up to it. And then the next thing you know, you're doing it or you're signed up for it. You're on that line ready to start. And and I personally feel like I've had a tremendous amount of just personal growth through it.
Even though we do these things, that doesn't make it not insane. I just want to make sure that we're clear on that point, that it is still insane.
Completely.
That is quite fair. And also going a little deeper into that, as a coach and seeing some of your athletes and stuff out there, I mean, how do you think that it benefits folks to do these events? I mean, do you see benefits from it? I personally know there are benefits from it. I think it's undeniable, but you interact with more people that are are working through this process than I do. I'm just working through my own process, and that's all I can handle personally. But
Yeah, it is so fun to help other people reach their goals because I do have people come to me who are really like, I don't know if I can do this, but I want to try. And it's like, yeah, we're gonna try, all right, and you're gonna do it. So it is fun to be on people's journeys. And so, everyone I work with is on some kind of journey. Everyone's different, just like our own personal journeys. We're all different. Yeah, it's amazing because I work with a lot of people who are doing like their first 50K or their first marathon or their first 100 miler, whatever it is. Some people is their first trail run, like they're just getting into trail running. And, it's so fun because I get an outside view and you can see it from, them glowing like, wow, I can't believe I did that. Or even weightlifting, like, hey, I just deadlifted my weight. I cannot believe that, and it's just so amazing to see when somebody surprises themselves, even though I knew they could do it, when you see their reaction that they surprise themselves with how they did, it's amazing. Because I've had those personal experiences, but I get to witness this with other people. And so yeah, it's just there's something in, being outside, being able to move your body over large distances. There's just something freeing about it, but just empowering. Like if I can do these hard things, I know I can do hard things in life. And so I totally see that, the mind shift, I think that happens, the confidence that you gain. It's just amazing to see that in other people because of course we experience it. But yeah, it's, when I think about what are the benefits and I look at people I coach or people I run with, it's not a replacement for therapy. Like if you need help, of course, that's what medication and therapy, professional help is for. But I think that doing endurance sports and doing any kind of physical activity that brings meaning to your life and brings confidence, brings just all of these things to your life, it is a tool in your toolbox for whatever you're going through in life. I mean, because let's face it, it's not like life is easy for any of us, And so, yeah, it's just fun to be able to share that with other people.
And Lauren, I think that research has shown that mental health does improve dramatically the more time people spend outside and the more time people spend training and exercising. I like you said, it's not a replacement for therapy, but it's a great place to start if you are having some mental health challenges, I think.
Oh, for sure. The benefits, I mean, there's so much research going on now about all the different types of exercise and how they affect our brain. We know that it's a multifactorial deal when we're dealing with mental health. It's not just our brains, it's our whole body. And so, yeah, there's no doubt that can really be a huge tool for people. It's a tool I use for myself. It's a tool I see other people using. And yeah, the benefits from it are just amazing. And so I like to always point that out because people are like, oh, I'm just not someone who exercises. I'm not someone who runs. You don't have to run, get out and hike if you want to. Anything that brings you outdoors, especially, yeah, where you're moving your body. It's been shown unequivocally to help mental health.
It's so true. And I mean, heck, I was late and held everybody up to start this podcast because I had to, I was having so much fun in the woods, and I was like, Albert's all sloppy with mud and I am too. And we're just mucking through the woods, and I was looking down at my watch. I was like, oh, I can run another 20 minutes and I'll still make it in time. Turns out I was cutting it a little close. But so, when we talk about middle age, people in their middle age are also at like the peak of their careers usually, or the busiest part of their lives. They're raising kids. You've got 3 kids. You're doing this coaching thing. How do you fit it in? And then how do you take that experience with your clients and help them, fit it in? I think this might be one of the biggest advantages to a coach, really, is having somebody that's doing this kind of thinking for you, because your life is already, if you're a potential client, your life's already chaotic. And if someone can take that and do that for you.
Yeah, definitely. You hit the nail on the head. This is typically a really busy time for most people. Midlife is, a lot of my clients do have kids or high pressure jobs, or travel a lot for their jobs. For myself, it's a juggling act. And you're right. For hiring a coach, that can be a main driving force behind hiring a coach is I'm so busy, I don't know how to fit this into my life. And that's my job, is to help that person figure it out. It's a constant battle for me to figure out. You have to get really creative. That's what I tell people. You got kids, you got jobs, you got all these responsibilities. You can make it work. It might not look like everybody else, and you got to be okay with that. My training totally does not look like other people's training. And I'm okay with that because I have to do what I can to make it work and get really creative with it. And that's what I help my clients do, is to get really creative with it. All kinds of ideas. I've been training since kids were little. I have it. My third child was born right as I got into running, and I was still breastfeeding him at my first 50K. So, you want to talk about juggling things. I totally get it. And, it's funny because people will come to me that I coach and they're like, oh, I'm so sorry. I had a rough week. I couldn't do that. I'm like, don't apologize. That's your life. This is for fun, but we also take it seriously, right? And so how do we balance that? And so it really is a matter of getting creative and setting priorities. For example, a lot of people love to Netflix and chill. There's nothing wrong with sitting down and watching Netflix. The only time I truly watch or binge watch shows is if I have to get on the treadmill. That's my TV time. Sometimes I'll watch at night, but I usually end up falling asleep. I'm not, if I'm, instead of reading a book, I'm listening to a book while I run or work out. So it's just for me a trade-off, like the time I might have spent sitting quietly reading a book. Now I'm going to put in my earbuds and listen to that book while I do my run. Or, I'm not going to sit and watch 20 episodes of a Netflix show tonight. I'm going to go to bed early. And then tomorrow, while it's raining, I may jump on the treadmill and watch a few shows while I'm running. And there's just that, I'm going to take the stairs. Okay, my appointment's on the 11th floor. I don't care. I'm going to take the stairs. I'm going to park at the end of the parking lot. To me, every bit of movement counts. If I have 10 minutes, I'm going to do some box step ups. If I've got 10 minutes and I can put the news on and I'm waiting to pick up a kid or something, I'll go for a walk. I'll do some box step ups. Whatever I can do to get creative. Maybe an early morning run, late night run, maybe put my bike on the bike trainer because I got a double duty something. Whatever I can do to get creative, that's what I'm going to do. And I give my clients permission to do that as well.
Just reminds me of some research I saw that kind of bundling things you enjoy, like a really engaging audio book or a show you like, with the treadmill time or the time running. It's a good way to keep people consistent. It's a good way to stay motivated. I've heard that's a very effective strategy.
100%. That's why I tell my clients, like, save your favorite shows for the treadmill. I mean, I find I actually pay better attention to the show when I'm on the treadmill, because when I sit on my bed and watch TV, I'm scrolling on my phone. I'm having a conversation with my husband. Like, I'm doing like 3 different things. I'm not really paying attention. When I'm on the treadmill, I'm like paying attention to that. I'm like into it and I'm running. I'm feeling good. Same thing with the book. If I put on an audio book at home, I'm going to be distracted by 50 million things. But if I'm running in the woods and I want to listen to a book, it's got my attention. So yeah, I think pairing things together is a good strategy for motivation and to help with discipline, for sure.
Well, and that kind of leads into the last question I really have for you. And then actually, Chris, I'm going to hand it over to you for weightlifting, because I just need to sit back and learn on weightlifting because I don't do any of it. I'm the bad runner that's what I do is I run. That's it. So, but really, how do you stay motivated? You've been doing this for over a decade now, and what keeps you going out there every single day? You've accomplished all, you've run 100-milers. What makes you want to do another 100-miler, or what makes you want to do the next thing? How do you mentally keep yourself going back for more?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I talk about motivation a lot with clients and just people on social media in general, because people just look at me and think, oh, she's just highly motivated all the time. She just loves like training like crazy to do these things. And the truth is, it's not always that way. Not at all. And I'm sure you all go through periods yourselves like this, where it's like, man, I'm just kind of not motivated to do what I need to do. That is normal. That's human nature. There, no one is always motivated. And so there's a couple of perspectives that I have, and one is action first, and then motivation follows. So when people, jump into a new program or training for something new, it's flashy, it's new, it's exciting. Of course, you're going to be highly motivated, but that will wear off. Life sets in, life gets hard. Maybe you're going through a tough time at home, tough time at work, whatever it may be. That motivation is going to be gone. And so that's when the discipline takes over. You really have to just be honest with yourself and be like, okay, what is the bare minimum I'm going to accept during a tough week? What is the most I can put out this week and still, maintain everything else that needs to be done or maintain my emotional state? So I think it's just so important for people to, one, understand that motivation is not what drives you for the long term. It is a discipline. And so I always go back and I tell myself this as well on rough days. You guys have probably read maybe North by Scott Jurek. And one of the things he comes back to when he's kind of struggling through some parts of doing the AT is, this is who I am and this is what I do. And so I like to remind myself of that. I love what I do. I love being out on the trail, covering distances, challenging myself. I love it. It doesn't mean I always love the training. That's normal. But I do the training. I do what I need to do because that's who I am and this is what I do. And so when you take something and you make it more of a core identity, running's not my identity, but the discipline to keep my body active and fit is a core identity. And so you can never outperform your identity. So if you identify as someone who just can't work out and is not active and will never be, well, that's what you're going to be. And so if you identify as someone who is disciplined to stay fit, stay active, and chase goals, that's who you'll be. And so it's really important to kind of identify, like, okay, who do I want to be? What do I want to do? Tough week. I can't run. Okay, go for a walk, go for a hike. It's okay. It doesn't mean that every week's going to be completely successful. It doesn't mean that you're not going to miss training runs and all of these things. But when you have your kind of core identity of who you are and how you handle things, you are much more likely to pick back up and be able to jump into training and do what you need to do. And so it is an ebb and flow. My training's not perfect. Nobody is, unless you're probably getting paid to do this. And let's be honest, and this is fun, right? I always remind people we're doing this because we love it.
Right.
And so I think it's so important to just look at the big picture and understand those components. So I try to bring that into my coaching, kind of the mental aspect of how do I do this type of training for 100 miles. It's a huge investment. It's a huge investment of your time and energy, and so you really have to kind of recognize, okay, what are my behaviors? What do I feel like when things are tough? What do I tend to do? And you have to recognize and kind of make a plan for that to be successful, I feel like.
And I really like the action first, motivation later. I mean, yesterday, I think you and I both had kind of one of those experiences because I saw you out on the same trail I was on. And yesterday wasn't one of those days you want to get started, for sure. It was, I actually pulled up to the parking lot and no one else was there. And I was texting with your husband. I was like, Jim, I'm just going to wait till you run a little later and I'll join you. And then lo and behold, two other guys showed up and I was like, oh, I guess I'm going. So
Committed.
Yeah.
But I've never, I say never. There are times that I've gone on runs that I did regret, but almost, I'd say 90% of the time, every run that you dreaded going on or every hard thing you dreaded doing, you are grateful you did after you did it.
Oh, for sure. I have the same. Like even yesterday, I was the same. I was like, God, I need a long run. It's cold and rainy. Everyone in my group bailed except for one girl. And I was like, maybe I should just hit the treadmill. And I was just really kind of picking myself, getting out there. And then once I was out there, I was like, God, I love this. And afterwards, I felt so great. And so I'm like, I'm so glad I didn't miss it. And so those experiences, I think, do reinforce kind of the process. And the more of those experiences you have, the more likely you are to get up and get out there when things are tough, because you know from experience that you're going to end up loving it and be happy that you did it. Yeah.
And I guess the only thing I would add to that is, and I'm sure you hopefully would agree with this, is there are, and I think you kind of hit on this to some degree, there are those runs you get out on that don't go good, that other 10% of the runs that aren't good. And what I always try to do at least is personally remind myself, like, this is just one run. Just because I'm having a bad day today, I'm not performing, my body's not performing like I want it to today. Tomorrow is a different day, it's going to be a better day, and not all runs are going to be great. With that all said, I like I said, I'm going to turn this over to Chris for a little bit, because when he's the personal trainer between the two of us, and also the one that actually lifts something other than, a sandwich to his face.
Well, yeah, Lauren, I do want to ask you some questions about specifically program development, although I think last week was a hard week for a lot of us with the weather. I missed a run and ended up actually buying some snowshoes and snowshoed up a mountain instead of for that missed run, and that was an okay trade-off. But
Yeah.
But on program development, so let's talk specifically. Let's talk about an untrained runner. Okay, somebody's just getting started. When you're developing that program, well, let's start. Say they want to run. How much strength training are you going to put that person into?
Yeah, so someone who's just a beginner, everything starts very basic, like the very basic, because for a multitude of reasons. One is we never want someone to come in to a new exercise program feeling overly fatigued, overly sore, feeling inadequate, feeling frustrated. But we also don't want to have someone hurt themselves either. And so, usually if it's somebody that's brand new to weightlifting and to running, it's like a new thing. We are going to start at the most basic level. We're going to get them moving consistently. We're going to just build their cardiovascular system. When you think about, I think one of the biggest struggles for people who are new at this, who are jumping in, your cardiovascular system will adapt pretty quickly, but your joints, your ligaments, your tendons, those supportive tissues take much longer. Bone to adjust to loads takes way longer. So we really have to remember that just because they may feel good doesn't mean they're necessarily ready to really ramp things up. So I like to take a conservative approach. I'm going to get the person moving on a regular basis to where it becomes a routine. We're going to do it in a way that's pretty safe. Like if somebody's new to running, we're going to start with 3 days a week of just like 20 or 30 minutes of movement, not even running, right? Kind of like what you think of as couch to 5K, some walking, some easy jogging. We're just getting the body used to moving in that way. We're getting the mind set up like this is routine. We're just getting the body, adjusted to moving. And so the strength training during that time is going to be very basic. We're just going to start with body weight exercises and work on form. We're going to work on just kind of feeling confident with those. The most sore people will probably be is when they do new things. When your muscles do novel things, that's where we get the real soreness from. So it's to be expected that anyone who's starting a strength training or running program, they're going to feel really sore in the beginning. We need to manage that well. We want to be able to know, like, is this sore because you're doing something new? Or do we have like an injury forming? Like we've got to be able to tell. So I think some of the most important things are getting a regular movement in, making sure there's days of rest between that. Your body needs to recover from this new activity, making sure that strength training, it's just the basics of we're going to push, pull, press, all of those things, learn what a hip hinge is, how to squat, and, what our range of motion is. And so that's where we start, is the very basics. And it's not flashy. It's not, it's not very exciting, but again, it's building the foundation of the house. And so then we just progress based on the person. That's the beauty of a coach. It's based on how that person's progressing because I'm working with them one-on-one. So from week to week, it's not like they're following this rugged, rigid plan and, oh no, I'm really sore, but I got to do this workout. No, we're going to step back if we're working one-on-one and be like, okay, how are you feeling? Other indicators, how are you sleeping? What's your mood like?
Sure.
What are your hunger cues? Like if those are all way out of whack, okay, we need more time to kind of just get this groove going. So there's lots of factors to take into consideration for someone who's just starting out.
Yeah, because of course you don't get stronger while you're working out. You get stronger during recovery. You don't get
That's
faster
right.
when you're running. You get faster during recovery. What about a more seasoned? Let's say you have an advanced runner who doesn't do any strength training at all. What exercises would you be putting somebody whose name might start with a T, for example, into?
Yeah, no, that's a perfect example. There's a lot of runners who just run and they don't strength train. And some people, feel good with that. I would say females particularly are going to benefit more from strength training in their 40s because of the bone, right? The bone health issues. The more that we can train with resistance, the stronger we're making our bones. So again, even if someone comes and they're well conditioned, let's say they're a runner, but they haven't done any strength training, we're going to start the same basic strength moves, body weight. Because again, if we make that athlete so sore that they can't run, they're going to be like, I hate strength training. This is stupid. I'm not going to do it. So it's really important when somebody comes to me who has been running regularly and wants to incorporate other things like strength training, that we do so again in a very slow, gentle way that doesn't interfere too much with their running. Because no one's going to do something where they're like, well, I can't even go do my long run. I feel awful. So again, we'll start with the basics, and everyone's a little different on how they progress. And so, we'll progress over time to lifting heavier weight, doing a little bit more activity. I'm a big fan of plyometrics because one, for bone health, but also for power production. There's a lot of recent research that has shown if we really want to increase power production from the push off when we run, well, we're going to need to look at some plyometric exercises to do that. And so I'm a big fan of, I think a lot of people in their head imagine when they come to me for strength training, they're going to do like bodybuilding exercises. Like they're going to be doing 200-pound deadlifts and, which is so not true. Now, if somebody wants to do that, that's fine. But that's not how we train like an athlete. To train like an athlete means you're going to move in all planes of motion. It means that we're going to progress weight over time, and we're going to periodize that, right? So like as you're training and ramping up for a big race, the strength training is going to change. And we're going to jump and bound and do all of these things that make us a well-rounded athlete. And so that's really my goal with strength training. I don't have anybody that's like looking for bodybuilding. I'm not that kind of coach. But I think in people's minds, like I still have women come to me and they're like, I'm afraid to like pick up that 20-pound weight on my squat because I don't want to get bulky. I'm like, oh, you're not going to get bulky. Like that is, it's hard to get bulky. You're going to have to eat like 1,000 extra calories a day and lift lots of weights all the time. Like that's not what we're doing here. And so just trying to reteach a lot of people, like, you're not going to get bulky. You're not going to, it really is. It's a progression from very simple, easy things to progressing to then I want them bounding and jumping and lifting and doing all of those things.
I'd like to just kind of throw in and ask you too, from somebody that did it the dumb way, just, was like, hey, I'm going to go run. And that's all I still do basically is run. A lot of my issues obviously were connective tissue issues. And I think that a lot of runners' issues revolve around connective tissue things because you'll build that muscle fine running, but the connective tissue doesn't necessarily follow. And that leads a lot of runners, and I know from personal experience, to a lot of setbacks, like lots and lots of setbacks.
Injury.
I've reached a point now where I kind of feel like I've got very strong connective tissue, so I don't have those issues typically at all. I need to knock on wood a little bit here as I say that and go out on a run tomorrow and pull something. But do you think that doing the strength training helps kind of jumpstart that too, so that people aren't just going through the stupid way like I am? They're actually like progressing to the distances they want to do in a shorter amount of time because they've put in some work. I don't know if this is true, but is that the case you find?
Yeah, so it's interesting because you'll go on social media, you'll talk to different trainers. There's some people that will say, if you strength train, you will not get injured, and then there's other people who are like, you don't need to do any strength training because there's no research to back up the injury thing. But here's what we know for sure. Strength training and doing all these things doesn't make you bulletproof. Everyone is susceptible to injury if you're moving your body in a repetitive way. That we're humans. That's just the way we're built. And so what strength training does is it makes you a more durable, resilient athlete. And that's just the bottom line. That's what it does. It makes it much more likely to avoid injury. And if you do get injured, to be able to rebound a little bit better and to handle that better. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. Like the muscle can grow pretty strong pretty quickly compared to connective tissues. And then we have bone, which really lags behind, takes months and months to remodel, which is a whole fascinating process that I've been going down the rabbit hole in research, and it's just fascinating. Strength training kind of takes all of those things, muscle, connective tissue, bone. The point of it is, one, to prevent injury, but by really just making you a well-balanced, durable athlete. I mean, that is the goal. There's been new research about with tendinopathy, like with people that have, tendinitis and things. And, it doesn't matter how much they rest or stretch, they can't get rid of it. They go to PT, they rest, they stretch, it doesn't go away. Well, there's some new research that was just published. I was reading about how isometric exercises can really target the deep tendon cells and really help remodel them. So we're learning still how used to be you always rest, ice everything, rest, no activity. Now we know better. We know if you go to a PT who's up on current research, we are moving. We are moving in a way that is safe, as long as it's not a bone injury. We are moving the tendon, the muscle, because it needs that. And so we don't necessarily need to halt everything, but we need to give it attention and figure out, well, why are we having that issue? And so there's a lot of new research coming out that's really interesting. And a lot of it involves, yeah, we're still moving, but we're going to be doing things that target that tendon, that muscle, whatever it is. And so again, just, if we look at it collectively, there's some very big coaches in ultra running who are like, don't strength train, don't do any of that. Like, that's just a waste of your time. And they will, just swear on it all day and all night. Like, don't strength train. It's just a waste. And, I look at it from the perspective, even if it doesn't help you prevent injury, there is this whole other side of building muscle mass. It is an endocrine tissue system. It is a hormone, right? It's sending hormones, absorbing hormones. It is an insulin sensitivity moderator. It is, the stronger your muscles, the stronger your bones, right? There are so many things to building muscle mass besides injury prevention and becoming a better runner that, in my opinion, it's just like, why not do it? Because the benefits are just a multitude in so many ways that you just can't go wrong with it.
Tony, I hope you're writing this down.
Yeah, take notes, Tony.
So, Lauren, you said with a couch to 5K kind of aspiring athlete, I guess how we would characterize them. You start easy, 20, 30 minutes a day, 3 times a week. So let's say that you're taking a 5K to a half or a half to a whole. How are you going to modify that when somebody is well trained, they're reasonably fit, but they're really wanting to go from sort of a competent athlete to more of an elite athlete? Where do you start?
Yeah. And so, the biggest thing you got to do is up the volume, the overall volume. The research is pretty clear. And we all know just from experience, the more volume of running, that you're doing, the better your performance, the better, your endurance, you'll be able to go longer. And so the goal is to safely increase running volume over the week. And so that does include lengthening their long run, because if you're working your way up, let's say to a marathon, well, you need to be able to run longer distances in training so that you feel prepared to complete the marathon. So, that's when it becomes tricky fitting in the extra time into people's schedules. And so That looks different depending on the person. Some people may try to do as little during the week and then try to do it all on the weekend, which can, for a lot of people cause some trouble. Because again, we're stacking things to where we could get an injury from that repetitive, use and not enough rest. And so in the beginning, when you're transitioning from, let's say, a 5K up to a half or full, it does become a little tricky about, okay, where do we put this volume? How do we spread it out through the week in a safe way? When can you do it? I know you got a job, you got kids. How are we going to fit this in? But yeah, it's all about adding volume in a way that doesn't give you an injury or overwhelm your life. And so that's where it really, it becomes tricky.
And a lot of coaches use a lot of different strategies when on days where you don't have a lot of time, hill sprints, intervals. Do you use any type of those strategies for people who are specifically training for distance running? But do you use some of these strategies to kind of increase the VO2 max?
Yeah, so for every runner, no matter what distance they're doing, there will be some high intensity components, which is the speed work or hill sprints or whatever it may be. Because when we think about energy systems, we have like two different energy systems. And so the goal is to kind of maximize our VO2 max and to maximize that lactate threshold so that we can extend our endurance. Those are the two big players in the game. And so I like to tell people, think of it as two different energy systems. We're going to run most of our miles easy. We're conditioning our body to, use that aerobic zone. We're building more mitochondria in our muscles. We're building more blood vessels. We're setting the stage to deliver lots of oxygen everywhere so you can run a long time. And then the high intensity stuff, the sprinting, the hill work, all of those types of things, that's building the other energy system, right? That's where we're having to modify or, mediate with lactate. That's when we're pushing that VO2 max so that we, have the capacity to push more oxygen through everything we've built, like the mitochondria and these blood vessels. So I really try to make that distinction, like think about two different energy systems. And a lot of my athletes don't really care about running faster. Some do, but I have them, they're like, I don't care. I'm like, we're still doing speed work. Sorry. Because it's not always about getting faster. It's about maximizing those energy systems. And they work together so that you can run whatever it is you want to run. So yeah, they're vital, in my opinion. To be the most successful runner at any distance, you need to run a variety of effort levels. You really do. And some of those, the reason for running some of those effort levels is to help your VO2 max or your lactate threshold or your leg turnover. There's just so many things that are tied up into why do we do sprints or hill work or why. So that's a part for every runner, whether they're doing, a 5K or 100 miles, they're going to be doing a variety of effort levels.
So maybe you could talk a little bit about VO2 max. A lot of people don't probably even know what that is. My Garmin has an estimated VO2 max. Mine's 48. Tony's is probably in the 50s. But what does that even mean? And how much attention should we pay to those numbers?
Yeah, so your VO2 max is always the one most athletes hear about. That number, on a scale, it gives you this kind of relative meaning. It is the higher the number, that the better you are at delivering oxygen to your muscles so they can produce work, right? That's really the bottom line is if we think about it in really general times. It's how much oxygen can we get to move our muscles and to move as fast as we want. Now, VO2 max there is a genetic component. So for example, if we look very elite athletes, like look at Kilian Jornet, who's like the mountain goat that just runs up mountains all day long. He has an extremely naturally high VO2 max. So he can work on that and push it even higher, and he can perform with high intensity during these hard races because he's able to deliver so much oxygen to his working muscles. Now, if someone's born with a naturally low VO2 max, there's only so much work you can do to put, it doesn't matter how much work you do, you'll never get a VO2 max to match an elite. And that's okay. We want to maximize our own VO2 max. And so I always tell people, don't worry too much about the number. Our goal is to maximize your own VO2 max. Everybody's got a genetic limit. That's life. And so you can manipulate your VO2 max, but only so much. That is just the reality of it. That's why we have Olympic athletes and we have us regular folks who are sitting here today talking on a podcast. And that's okay. And so the VO2 max that you're reading off of your wristwatch, your phone, huge margin of error. So if you want to get like an accurate VO2 max, you're going to have to go to a lab. You're going to have to get on the treadmill and do all the testing. That is the only way to really know your VO2 max. So when people talk about data from their watches, their chest straps, their phone, take it with a grain of salt. The good thing about that data is it's consistent for you. So the changes you see in those numbers and those parameters, those are consistent, even if they're not accurate. So if your VO2 max is improving, reading from your watch, okay, that's great. You're improving. Now, are those numbers actually accurate? Yeah, I don't know, probably not. But you can see the trend. And so that's important, I think. But I like to tell people to just don't pay too much attention to your watch or your apps. I mean, there's some data in there that it's certainly helpful because it's what we have to go on. But I never really get too focused on that. And in fact, when I have athletes that get too bogged down worrying about paces and numbers and heart rate, I tell them to take off their watch and go run. Don't even wear a watch. You're not recording this one. Because it's sometimes we become so dependent on that data that we become out of tune with our own cues.
With our bodies.
Our own bodies, our own effort levels. When I coach, my job is I do look at my clients' heart rate data a lot of times and paces. However, my clients are focusing on their own perceived effort levels. We're worrying about data as a separate thing. I want people to be in tune with what their body feels like. And it's really hard to do that when you're staring at your watch. Really hard when you're staring at your heart rate. Heart rate is one of those things that is so variable for so many reasons on any given day that I don't want anyone to hang their hat on heart rate. It's a great tool. It's something we look at. People become obsessed with it, and it really doesn't help things. What helps is to be more in tune with our internal cues. I feel like, and then when we feel confident with that, then we can look at the external data and kind of put things together.
So being too much of a data geek is not a helpful mindset.
I mean, I will admit that I love looking at my data and kind of comparing it, and I love it. And I think most of us as runners do. We all look at it. But I have seen instances where people become too hung up on it that it actually probably impedes their performance because they're so worried about what's the data going to say that it's almost like then they're ignoring their internal cues. And so it's a balancing game. It really is.
If it's not on Strava, it actually did still happen.
That's right.
Your heart and your lungs, you know that it still happened, even if it's not on Strava.
And I am so caught up in that trap, I will admit.
I think we're all guilty a little bit, but it's helpful to keep perspective.
It is,
I think that the motivation, though, to some degree of the watches has to be there too. Before, I've actually had a GPS watch since they were like the size of a small laptop on your wrist, but then those were so bad that they weren't really worth using. But it's hard to go out and do a run and then not be able to look back at it. I know that I should mentally be there, but I'm just not there yet. So the last thing that I kind of wanted to get to here, and the most exciting thing I think that everyone was waiting for is you were recently on a reality TV show. So tell us a little bit about Naked and Afraid and what that experience was like, and maybe some lessons you learned from it that hopefully made you a better athlete, or maybe didn't. I don't know. You tell us.
So Naked and Afraid, I was approached by the production staff. They had found me on Instagram and had sent a message like, hey, did you ever think about, applying to our show? We think you'd be great. And I'm like, what? What are y'all looking at? This was coming out of the pandemic. I think they were, it was a tough time during the pandemic, obviously, to film reality TV and things. And so they're kind of coming out of the pandemic and looking for some fresh faces to take on challenges. And so I totally thought it was a joke at first or scam, like, oh, okay, this isn't real. But then it became apparent it was real. And so I was like, I don't know that, my background, I love the outdoors. Yes, I'm a runner and endurance athlete. But it all started because I love to be outside. I love hiking, camping, backpacking, all of those things I've done for, since I was a teenager. And so, I do have some outdoor skills. I would never call myself, like a true survivalist. I'm not one of those people that goes out and hunts and does all those crazy things just to try to survive. But I do enjoy being outside as much as possible. And I love primitive camping and all of those things. So I think they were looking for some people, I was a trail and ultra runner, spent a lot of time doing things outside. And so, I was a little bit timid about going on the show just because I'm not some expert survivalist. But I decided, what the hell, can I cuss on this show? I don't even know. Sorry. And so it really was one of those things where it's like, yeah, it was one of those things where it's like, well, why not? Like, I mean, at the time I was like 41, 42 years old. And I'm like, just say yes. Like, you need to say yes to more things. This could be exciting. And I did. I said yes. And I really thought I would get in the interview process and they'd be like, oh my gosh, this chick does not need to be on the show. This is, a mistake. But they wanted me on the show. So I went. Ended up going to Africa, which was crazy. I've always wanted to go to Africa. I just didn't know I was going to be naked and afraid and starving. But it was overall, if I separate the TV side from the actual experience was amazing. I will tell you, not many people get to experience Africa the way I did, and I am forever grateful for that because it was quite an experience. I mean, I was exposed to things and experienced things that I otherwise never would have on my own, not in a million years, And I got to meet some really cool people. My tribe mates were amazing, ended up being amazing endurance athletes themselves. And so really loved that. Just really loved kind of exploring the whole survival thing in Africa and meeting these people. The TV side of it wasn't so great. I knew that going in that was probably not going to be a fun aspect. It was even way more intense than I had anticipated. I mean, there's a camera in your face and on your naked body every second of every day that you're there. There's a mic on 24/7. Nothing is hidden. And so that was quite shocking. Just being in it. Definitely, I didn't do it for the TV side. I did it because I was like, dang, I get to go survive in Africa. Like, this sounds pretty amazing to me. And that part was amazing. So I'm glad I did it. I met some amazing people. I got to see kind of the production side, which was very interesting. I don't think I would do another reality TV show. I don't know. But yeah, the whole experience for me, I'm glad I did it. It was tough. The recovery from it was tough. On the flip side of that, because when I came home from Africa, not only had I not run for, over a month, I had lost like 25 pounds, most of it muscle. And so I really, honestly, talking about the 5K, someone new runner training for a 5K, that was me. I had to completely start over. Not because I was deconditioned, so to speak, after a month, but because I had undergone starvation for so long, and I'd lost so much muscle mass that I could not physically run when I got home. And, I had to gain some weight, but it wasn't, when you recover from starvation, it's not just like, oh, you go eat a hamburger and you're good again. It is a process. It's a metabolic process. It's a physical process. It's really tough. And obviously I couldn't run. So I put myself on my own couch to 5K program. And funny enough, when I started out as a runner in the beginning, I didn't do anything right. I didn't know what I was doing. I just ran. I just did stuff, And this time, having been a coach and having all this education and experience, I put myself on the couch to 5K kind of plan and then just went with it and built up progressively. And I ended up having the best year of running of my entire life the next year. And so, yeah, and going into the next year now. So now it's 2024. So 2023 was the year I kind of got back into running after Naked and Afraid. And man, the best year of performance ever. And, you know, who knows what this year will bring, but I feel good. And I think having that reset, like that complete, like, let's start over and build from the bottom up was so good for me because I was stuck in my old ways. And this kind of was a fresh start to kind of coach myself, how I coach my own athletes, and take my own advice. And it ended up being amazing. So I'm kind of grateful that I had this weird reset of Africa and starvation to kind of get me on a different training track. Yeah.
Thank you for your time. Really enjoyed the conversation and really enjoyed having you.
Yeah, this was super fun. I'm so glad you guys invited me.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Well,
thanks
hopefully we
again,
can talk you into coming back in the future.
Yeah, sure.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.